Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime. I am your host, as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and Dragon Ball Super Broly. So here's how the video is going to go. I'm going to talk about the movie itself and how math is used along the way, how math is used in Dragon Ball in general. And I'm also going to talk about how math was used for a few jokes within the video, the movie, and just oh my god, I have so much to say, and I'll discuss my feelings on the video. Spoilers, I enjoyed it. It holds up. I rewatched it for the first time in a while, and I did so really recently, like within an hour recently, and yeah, I got some stuff to say. So, one thing to assume for this video is assume spoilers. Assume all the spoilers. If you've already seen the movie, you're good. If you don't care and haven't seen the movie, you're still good. If you care, it depends on what you think about spoilers and if that would matter for you. Either way, assume all the spoilers. Let's get into it. So, with Dragon Ball, like there's a lot of math in it, and I dig it. I dig it hard. Um, and I've talked about it in a lot of videos, like around 40 at this point. But to start off with the movie, um, so again, assume all the spoilers because we're just gonna jump right into it. So in the beginning of the movie, like that first like a half hour or so, uh, it talks about, or sorry, it shows you the stuff with the Saiyans, like their eventual demise, and it sets up Broly and his power from the get go. Um, and I think that's interesting because like one of the first things you see when the movie opens is you're seeing King Cold and his forces, and you see how it shows you that it's 41 years ago. So already you're starting out with the math, but seriously, right? Like just keeping track of how long ago things were, that gives you an indicator on that surface level. And then there's math all throughout the animation, and we'll get into that as we go on. But I think it was so interesting, right? It's like they packed a lot of emotion in that like first half hour or so, because you get to see Saiyans in I think a way that you haven't really seen them, um, and I'm gonna get into that in a little bit. But one of the other big things is like, so you jump to the past, it's 41 years ago, and you see King Cold's forces, and they're coming in hard, and they're using a lot of numbers here. You're seeing a bunch of people, right? And as you do, you see some familiar faces like the Ginyu Force, Zarbon, the Doria, all them. And then something interesting happens. King Cold introduces Frieza for the first time, and he indicates that he himself is retiring, and the Cold Force will become the Freezer Force. And so one of the first things Frieza does is he brings like 500 scouters for all the Saiyans, and he explains what they do and how they're similar to um, their scouting scopes. I forgot if that's the exact name, but they have these scouting scopes that they were using before. They had the scouters that Frieza brings along, and the idea is in both of these cases, they give you an idea of the people that you're viewing them on. I'm sorry, it's been a long day. But the idea is like they give you the power level or battle power of people in the vicinity, and they also give you their position. And Frieza uses this very brutally. He turns his on. He indicates how many people are hiding that have weapons on him. He's able to see their battle power. He's able to then see their position, and he systematically wipes them out with precision. It's super brutal. Um, but right off the jump, you see like math being used like kind of just right on the surface, and not to make this whole thing about power level, but I appreciate how they used it in the film. And one of the interesting things about it in Dragon Ball in general is that it gets at just so many things in terms of like math that I enjoy. Like first and foremost, it's a good example in data analysis because here's the thing, right? You have your tool and you're looking at an opponent and you get their power level. And yeah, I'm gonna just jump back and forth between power level and battle power, whatever I feel. Um, anyway, um, so you're able to think about power level, right? And if you're lucky, if someone is just like a fighter and they don't know how to suppress their ki or jump it up when they're shooting an energy blast in that concentrated method or concentrated way, then what you see is kind of what you get. But then again, I'd argue, like, I mean, what if they're the kind of person that their power level will increase if they're angry? Then you see them at their, just calmest, then what happens? Or you see them in a regular fighting situation, what happens? But more often than not, it's used to get an idea of people's power, and everyone adjusts accordingly. But we see early on in Dragon Ball that this tool is, while useful, doesn't give you the full picture, doesn't give you the full context. It doesn't take into account certain situations. So when someone designed this guide or whoever they may have been, there's certain things they didn't consider. Because early on, we see that the Earthlings have really good ideas about how to use power level, right? They can suppress it, and we see that on display all throughout the Frieza saga. And they also, when they power up a blast, can jump up their power level. We see this as early on as the Raditz fight. But yeah, I bring all this up because we start this movie talking about Saiyans, and here we are talking about power levels again. And I think that's interesting because like later on, you see Broly. They try to measure his power, and it doesn't work. And we're using like high tech scouters in this situation. They're able to get Paragus' father um, an accurate reading, but with Broly, it's not that their scouters broke, it just stopped registering at a certain point. So I think that's fascinating. And the other thing is like people can manipulate their power levels in order to directly deceive an opponent. Or if someone's using a god key, that's they can't really detect that, I imagine, because it's like not something that most people can actually detect. Just people who could read key. But anyway, power level digression, but that's a big part of Dragon Ball, and the community holds on to it because we're trying to make sense of the universe, and at a certain point, it's hard to register. And so, but you see it used throughout the film, and you see math all throughout the animation. Indicating speed, indicating the blast. There's so much care taken with like who is where and when, and when the fighting started, like how fast paced it is, and just oh god, so many other things, and that's a beautiful thing to me. There's also math in the editing, and transitions, and I think that's really cool. Math and the colors and how to balance that. Math in the music, math in the voice acting, and with the music, it's like it's how it's composed, how it's used throughout the film. And I just think that's really cool. And with the voice acting, you got the volume of the voices throughout, and being able to adapt. You also have the breathing. You have the way they say things. How many syllables the words have. Even like you can keep on playing and get deeper and deeper with that. But the whole thing is like there's a lot of deliberate choice. And since we're dealing with a product that wasn't initially American, we're dealing with dubbing, and there's a lot of math going into that and how that works and how that functions and how that flows. And then of course there's the Dragon Balls themselves, right? They are part of this movie. Bulma had 6 that were stored. They were looking for a 7th or sorry, rather, Bulma's Dragon Balls got stolen by Frieza Force, and then they had to find a 7th one, and they do use it later on, but it's just like there's math in the Dragon Balls collecting them, how many wishes they get on Dragon Balls, and that depends on which planet you're using or which rules you're using, because in the beginning it was just like on Earth, you get 1 wish, that's it, and it takes a year for the Dragon Balls to come. They turn into stone, and then it takes a year for them to be active again. But on Namek, it's different, right? Because they got 3 wishes, and I think it took 6 months. And then the Earth Dragon Ball got changed later on to 2 wishes, and I think it was still a year, but at some point I think it was 6 months, depending on if you use both wishes or not. And in this movie, we see 1 wish get used, so who knows what happened to the second one there. did they make a wish soon after? I forget the rules. They changed so much. But here's the kicker: when we're talking about those wishes, so a wish was made. If you've seen it, like to stop Broly from dying. But before that, it's like, well, what was Bulma collecting the Dragon Balls for? What was Frieza collecting the Dragon Balls for? It's really dumb in a brilliant way, and there's math. Okay, so here's the thing, right? Like when we look at like age, we look at height, weight, and all that good stuff, right? It's us using math to say something about a person or a thing, and we start with Bulma's wish. So with Bulma's wish, what she would have wished for was to look 5 years younger. Why 5 years? See, here's the thing. She wanted to look younger, but if she want 10 years younger, which we suggested she do, was it Whis or was it Goku? I think it was Whis who mentioned why not 10. But she says because people would notice and they would start asking questions. It's so dumb and it's a brilliant thing. But you know, it's math being used to tell a joke. And speaking of comedy, before we get to Frieza's wish, uh, comedy is mathematical in nature. You have your setup plus your punchline, and that equals your joke. And you can play around with different things to make that happen, right? Timing is key. You can play with subversion. You can play with something that is said, something that is read, some running gag. You can do so many things, some visual gag, so many things. And in this case, I just like that there's a lot of things going on because you have like the setup, you have the punchline, and there's also the math with the whole age thing. But it gets better because then there's a brilliant transition that leads you to Frieza after Bulma's wish. And I just think that was so great. I like editing. I like transitions. I think they're cool, and I only appreciate them more over time. So you get to Frieza, and it's revealed that he wants to wish for 5 whole centimeters. Why 5 centimeters? Why not use the second form? I remember seeing that for the first time. I'm like, well, he has a second form. So one of his henchmen asked him about that because, and he's like, well, people would know that that's not his actual form. And he wants to appear that he's still growing. And if he was something like 10 centimeters, then people would know something was up. It's so dumb because it's math being used to tell jokes, and there's math in the jokes already by virtue of them being jokes. And I like in this case that we had 5 years versus not doing 10 years, 5 centimeters versus not doing 10 centimeters. In any case, so there's math just all throughout the fight, and I dig it. I dig it hard. And so when we have the first fight with Vegeta versus Broly, I mean not the first fight in the film, arguably, or the first like major one, I suppose. But when you first have that, I think there's so much cool stuff that's going on, and we just get a crazy idea from Broly early on, right? Because and I'll circle back to the fight, but like in the beginning of the film, you don't get an exact reading, but you get that he's supposed to be considered elite, and if we're to believe things, then not only are their power level, like the baby's power levels being measured, but also their latent potential, and that's fascinating because like you also see that Goku's latent potential is considered lower, and that's kind of funny because it's like I mean they're going off of devices, and those devices are only as good as the people who make them, and there's so many things that they don't account for, especially training. But yeah, so one of the things that I found interesting is like when they're looking at Broly's power level though. Um, at one point it goes to something that is lower than when it was like crazy high, but still high enough to raise some red flags, so to speak. And I say that because it's red flags to King Vegeta. It's like because he's jealous that Broly is as strong as Vegeta, or way stronger than Vegeta, and has more potential. At least if they're to believe everything in the room, right? But anyway, so when Vegeta and Broly actually meet for the first time and they clash, they're going back and forth, and there's just like so much math and indicating the power struggle and indicating again the speed. Vegeta goes Super Saiyan, and if you know a thing or two about Dragon Ball, like it's a 50 um, times multiply, right? So it's like however crazy high their power levels are, Broly ends up adapting and evolving to push Vegeta to go to Super Saiyan again, 50 times multiplier, which is I still maintain insane, even if we're used to it by now. And so you know that he's really pushing him. And then, we don't know the power levels of Goku, Vegeta, Broly, or really anyone at this point, but we know they're crazy high. And at least, even if you don't know the exact power level, you know, like going Super Saiyan is an indicator that, yeah, things are getting crazy. But then the next step isn't like Super Saiyan 2 or anything like that. Dude goes God. Like he goes to Super Saiyan God or Super Saiyan Red, whatever you prefer. And we don't know the multiplier for that, but we know it's a crazy amount of power. um, and then later on, we see Goku and Broly fight, and he goes through the same things. But later, we see Blue, and Broly, Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan, or Super Saiyan Blue. We know Broly is just growing more and more powerful. So it's like it's not necessarily that he started. Oh, he started off really strong, but it's like it's not saying that he could master them. Like he was put in a position where he kept on evolving, and it could get to the point where you start to think about a version of Zenkai where you don't talk about it, because if you didn't know, the idea of Zenkai is like Saiyans get stronger as they fight, or the closer they get to death. You get used to the hearing like the closer they get to death a lot, but the longer they fight, you don't hear that nearly as much. But that's what's happening when they're out there. And in Broly's case, he's taking it to a whole nother level before he ever even really truly transforms. But he starts to transform into like a new form throughout the fight anyway. I mentioned the whole blue thing partially because it's cool and it's a thing that happened in the movie, but also we don't know how strong blue is compared to base, but we do know, based on previous descriptions, that Super Saiyan Blue is, Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan. So it's like what happens with, I hate that name. We know that's what happens when Super Saiyan God has Super Saiyan stacked on it, which we're led to believe in that it's still 50 times multiplier in this case. So whatever crazy multiplier that red is using, blue is multiplying that times 50 and making it just insane. And Broly mastered it. But then it gets crazier, and then we see Goku and Vegeta fight Broly, and then it still gets crazier, and then they abandon the fight and practice fusion. And what I like about how they abandoned the fight is that, they're like indicating that they knew what to do. They're distracting Broly, although we don't know it at first. And what did they do? They lead Broly to Frieza, which, there's math. There's math and the speed that they're going and the position for Frieza and tracking Broly and themselves as they move closer to their goal. And then they kind of drop Broly off on Frieza, and he beats this dude for a solid hour. And we know this because we see Goku and Vegeta go to Piccolo, and we see them practice the fusion dance, which is something that is inherently mathematical. You have to have the right position at the right angle. And then you have this thing that's just like multiplying your power to crazy degrees. Well, the result of two people fusing. So that new being is like way stronger than either one of them could be. And in this case, one of the things I really like is you already knew that if the angles were off, like if the fingers didn't match or something, or just one thing was off, you get a bad fusion, and maybe you get something like someone is like much skinnier or someone's like much bigger than what you would think that they would be, and their power levels affected in either direction. Um, and in this case, what I really thought was cool is there's a point where Piccolo is mocking their technique, and there's kind of like a diagram where they're drawing out like where the fingers are, or maybe you see the fingers and they're drawing lines around it, and you see angles, and he's like, yeah, your angles are off, and I just thought that was great. It was like, yeah, math in action. But they eventually get the fusion right, and see, here's the thing: they tried twice. It takes 30 minutes to fuse again after you use the fusion dance. So they tried once, they failed, they took 30 minutes. They failed a second time. Had to take 30 minutes before getting it right. So Frieza was getting bodied by Broly for an hour. He should be super dead, but it's super funny, so we're gonna let it go. And eventually we steps into the fight, and it just is an indicator of power. At this point, Broly has gone Super Saiyan, so whatever crazy multiplier he achieved, um, and we still don't know because like Paragus says something about, oh, it was like the great ape in human form, but the great ape thing is like 10 times, and that's not what's going on. Um, but anyway, like he goes Super Saiyan, so whatever crazy power level he's at, that's multiplied times 50. And so we know he's a force, but Whis is just dodging him left and right, casually. It's wild. So anyway, they get back. Um, Gogeta is now formed, and he's able to go to toe with Broly, and it's crazy. But then Broly keeps on getting stronger, so Gogeta has to go Super Saiyan. And at one point, they are going so hard, they're moving so fast, their blasts are just so powerful that they literally break the dimension, right? They shatter the dimension they're in, and they find themselves in a new dimension, and they're fighting for a good while in this like space in between spaces, and it's a completely different direction, and they had to fight so hard to get back into it. And anyway, the fight is progressing, Broly getting more powerful, and so Gogeta doesn't even go Super Saiyan God, right? Like he just goes straight to blue from Super Saiyan, and then he bodies Broly, and the wish gets made. In any case, there's math in all the ways that I said, and so much more in Dragon Ball, and I think it's really cool. And as for the movie itself, I like it. Dragon Ball Super Broly is not something that I just like expected to be as good as it was. Mostly because I didn't quite have expectations for it. I was more curious than anything else. Back when they had talked about there being a Dragon Ball Super movie, there was a lot of curiosity, and when they revealed that it'd be about Broly, I'm like, I'm not sure about this. But I'm curious, right? And then I saw it, and it was crazy. Because all the sad stuff in the beginning is like, whoa, what? That's awesome. And it ended up being really good, and I'm glad. Yeah, I think that's about all I want to say in this video. Please discuss in the comments. Tell me how you felt about the movie. Tell me how you feel about Dragon Ball. No, if you say that it sucks, I'm like, well, why did you watch this, right? But I don't think you all say that. So yeah, let me know what you think. See you around. Professor Prime out.